things that I think men need to hear. And I want to let you know that I consider it a great privilege to be able to speak here. It's overwhelming to me a little bit to sit here in a room full of men, well-established men, righteous, godly men, and to try to talk about what it means to be a man and what men need when I'm 31 years old. That's overwhelming to me, and it's a great privilege that you guys have given me an opportunity to speak, and I thank you for that. And I pray that you'll bear with me in my youthful ignorance, and that you'll help me when we're talking about these things. I'm going to ask somebody to take out their Bible, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, or at least all of you can if you want, but I'm going to ask somebody to read that verse for us. But I want somebody to read that verse with this one caveat. You cannot read it if you're carrying the NLT, the NIV, or the CSB this morning, okay? So whoever does not read from those translations, read 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 13. All right, I think you're reading from the New American Standard Bible, am I correct about that? Where it says, be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, and be strong. And so when Paul issues his closing remarks to the people of Corinth, he says these four things that this church needs to do. They need to be alert, they need to be aware, they need to stand firm, they need to stick to what they know, they need to have a backbone. He says you need to act like men, and you need to be strong. Now it's interesting, I asked for you to read it out of your translation and not those other translations, because when you look at those other translations, you'll notice that the sex has been removed. Did you notice that if you have one of those other translations? This is from the CSB. Notice that it says, be alert, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong. Isn't that interesting? You know, and when you look that up in the Greek, and I'm no Greek scholar, but I think I understand how to use some of the tools that I have, that masculine sense is there. It's not like the New American Standard translators are just pushing that word men in there. It's actually the fact that the CSB has pushed the idea of masculinity out of there. Isn't that interesting? And I think there's two important things to get out of that. The first one is, if there's any question in your mind about whether or not our culture, our society is at war with men and masculinity, there's one prime example where Bible translators, some of them at least, are pushing away the very idea that he would say, act like men. I think it's very true that our society is at war with men. We think masculinity is toxic. We think it's ugly. You're never going to hear anyone say anything on any sort of media about the good qualities of being manly. If we talk about manliness, we say it's toxic. And I'm really happy that you guys are having a men's day. I'm really glad to see churches doing things like this, because we need to reinforce the idea that being a man is a good thing, and that masculinity is not toxic, and that there is something special about being a man, something important about being a man, the way that God made us. And so I applaud you guys for reinforcing that by having a men's day here. But more to the point of our study, what I want you to see in that is that courage and bravery are ultimately fundamental qualities in men. That does not mean that it's impossible for women to be brave. Obviously, you got plenty of brave women in the Bible, don't you? Women like Rahab obviously shows tremendous courage. You have women like Deborah, who is more courageous than Barak was. Women obviously can be brave, but courage, as is shown by this text, is one of those bedrock qualities in men. It is something that should be found in every man. And just as women are known for their kindness, for their ability to nurture, for their compassion, men should be known for their fortitude, for their bravery, and for their courage. And so this week you guys are talking about what every man needs. And when that was posed to me, write something about what every man needs. Let's do a class about what every man needs. The first thing that came to mind is simply this, that every man needs courage. Every man, if he is going to call himself a true man of God, he has to have that bedrock quality within him. He needs to be brave. He needs to be courageous. So I'm going to ask you to take your Bible and turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I'm sure that you know what story that is. This morning we're going to look a little bit at the story of David and Goliath. And I want to give you a word of caution before we go there. I'm worried that when I tell you to turn to 1 Samuel 17, and I say we're going to talk about David and Goliath, that your eyes just kind of roll in the back of your head, and you're like, great, the young guy's talking about David killing a giant. This is going to be totally cotton candy, VBS stuff. And I want you to know that I don't intend to make this a trite lesson. And I do think that the story of David and Goliath is one of those stories that we leave in our childhood. One of those stories that we learned about when we were a kid, and then we just kind of leave it behind, and we think, that's important for kids. They need to learn to face their fears. They need to learn to get up and not be scared of the pitcher in baseball who throws really fast. David and Goliath will tell them that story. And then we just kind of leave that story behind because we think as grown men, we don't really need lessons on courage. That's for boys. I'm in Kentucky here, and so I imagine there's lots of fishers, lots of hunters, right? No? Yes? Yes? Somebody give me something. Yes? Okay. You guys are manly men, I imagine. And you guys go out in the woods. You guys hunt stuff. You guys do stuff. You guys work really hard. You guys have faced fears in many aspects of your life. But when you get older, it's not that you stop needing courage or that you have this courage within you. It's that your fears change a little bit. And so courage is still necessary even for older men. Even when we grow up. I'm not scared of the dark anymore. But there are plenty of things I'm scared of. Plenty of things I need courage to face. And I think the story of David and Goliath will help us out a little bit. 1 Samuel 17, let's read the beginning of this story. 1 Samuel 17, beginning in verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Socoh and Azekah and Ephes-dammim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Then a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. He also had bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze javelin swung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like the weaver's beam, and the head of his spear weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. He is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, and they were greatly afraid. Now put a pin in that story very quickly. And I want you to notice what happens there in verse 11. That it says, the men of Israel, they were dismayed and they were greatly afraid. And that is cowardice at play. That is ultimately what you see. Where here are these men of God fighting for the armies of Israel, and yet none of them are willing to stand up. All of them shrink back. They are dismayed and greatly afraid. They are completely shattered by their fear. And you and I ought to know that godly men do not let that happen to them. That's the first point of this story. That men of God do not let fear shatter them. They do not let fear cause them to stay on the sidelines. Men of God live with courage and bravery. Now, I do want to open it up here for a second and ask you simply, what does it mean to be courageous? In your mind, if you had to put a definition on it, what does it mean to be brave? What would you say? Yeah. Yeah. So bravery is doing what you need to do in spite of the fear. It's standing up. There's actually an old philosophical debate between which is the better man, the man who has no fear and is scared of nothing, or the man who does what he needs to do in spite of his fear. Which man is the better man? I say the one who is afraid and does what he needs to do instead. Would anyone add anything to that? What's it mean to be courageous? What's it mean to be brave? Okay. You don't back down from a challenge? You're going to say something else? Or no? Okay, no. You don't back down. I thought your mouth was about to move again. Sorry. Yeah, but you don't back down from a challenge. That's bravery. That's courage. You need to stand up, just like it says in 1 Corinthians 16:13, right? You need to stand firm in your faith. You need to have a backbone. That's what it means to be courageous. You don't back down when you need to stand up. What else? Okay, yeah. Put yourself in situations that are not comfortable or convenient or easy, right? And so not only when you're thrust into those situations do you stand up, but you're actually willing to go into those situations and do that. I displayed tremendous bravery because I got on a plane yesterday and I flew here. And I put myself in a situation I did not want to be in. I'll tell you that much. I do not like flying. And last night the weather was bad and it was scary, man. I did not like it. But I did it because I wanted to come speak for you guys. I do not like flying. So courage, in my mind, at least according to the dictionary definition, it means strength. Strength in the face of pain, grief, or fear. If you look at the etymology of the word courage, it's actually interesting. It comes from an old French word, courage, which is courage without the U. And it's kind of ironic that it comes from a French word. But it's an old French word. In 1300, the word courage meant heart. And so really, in a real sense, the word that we have for courage means heart. And so to be courageous, it means you don't give up, you don't shrink, you don't give in. And if you think about it, in the 1300s for the French, courage was the essential function of the heart. To have courage meant you have heart. And so if you're a man who has no courage, if you're a man full of cowardice, if you're a man full of fear, who allows yourself to shrink in those situations, you might as well not have a heart. You're not really a man at all. Strength in the face of pain, grief, or fear. That's what courage is. And I want you to appreciate this too while we're talking about the quality of courage. That it has been said, and I think rightly said, that courage is the greatest of all virtues. That it is the first virtue. There are many great men who believe that. Men like Samuel Johnson, who said, courage is reckoned the greatest of all virtues because unless a man has that virtue, he has no security for preserving any other. Winston Churchill said this, courage is rightly esteemed the first of human quality because, as has been said, it is the quality which guarantees all others. And both of those men probably were referencing Aristotle, who said courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees the others. And so do you see the point of what these men are saying? That courage is the greatest virtue, and courage is the first virtue, because it is the thing that enables you to do all these other virtuous things with consistency. And that's the main thing. Not just that you do virtuous things, but that you are able to do virtuous things with consistency. I'm sure everybody here has done some virtuous things recently. You know, the truth is, anybody can be honest when it's easy, right? When you did what your wife asked you to do and she says, hey, did you get that chore done? You say, yes, right? You are honest, and that's virtuous, right? But how hard was that? It's not very hard to be honest when you've done what you need to do. Anybody can be generous when things are going well. When you got a huge, enormous bonus at work, and then your neighbor asks you for $100, man, that's easy. It makes me feel good. I know I'm doing a good deed, and at the end of the day, it's not scary at all because I know I've got plenty of money still. Anybody can stand for truth in a building full of like-minded people. This is not hard. What I'm doing today is not hard. It takes zero courage. I mean, I guess I'm a little scared to stand up in front of people like anybody. But it takes basically zero courage for me to stand up here and read the Word of God and tell you some things that I think about it and try to make applications. Because I know that you guys all feel the same way that I do. I know that you guys aren't feminists. I know that we stand together and we believe the same things by and large. It takes no courage. But it's another thing to be honest when you haven't been the person you ought to be. It's another thing to be generous when things aren't going very well and money is getting kind of tight. And it's another thing to stand up and tell the truth when you're not around like-minded people. When you're around people at work or people at school who certainly do not see the world the way you see the world. And so what courage is, it is that virtue which enables us to practice godliness with consistency. To practice godliness when it's easy, when it's convenient, when it's comfortable, and to practice it even in those moments when it is insanely difficult. Courage gives us consistency in our godliness. That's why Peter writes this. In 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 5, he begins that famous passage about adding to your faith. He says, "Now for this reason also applying all diligence, in your faith supply moral excellence, and in your moral excellence, knowledge." Peter says the first thing you apply to your faith is moral excellence. And you might know that the Greek word there is the word arete, which is a word that means virtue, excellence, or valor. Courage. Courage is the first virtue. Because how are you going to add to your faith any of those other things if you don't have the courage to commit to being a godly man even when it's hard and even when it's scary? Courage enables us to practice consistent Christianity with consistency. And so, having said all of that, we have to ask ourselves the question, where does courage come from? Let me go back a second. Can I ask you guys, how do you feel about the courage of men these days? From your perspective, when you look at people maybe in the church or maybe in the broader culture, how do you feel is the state of courage in men in America today? Why would you say that? Yeah, yeah. And so you see in our culture a lot of men caving to pressure. One example that happened recently, which is actually a good example, but it revealed something to me, was what happened in Tampa Bay last summer. You remember there were 5 Tampa Bay Rays when they had, I don't know if you guys heard this story, we certainly did. There were 5 Tampa Bay Rays, and the Tampa Bay Rays were going to have Pride Night, and so they were supposed to wear this rainbow patch on their sleeve, and there were 5 Tampa Bay Rays who said, no, we're not going to do it. And it was kind of a cool story where everybody was really mad at them because they were refusing to wear that patch. But it also revealed something, that it is a national news story when 5 guys refuse to have the courage to refuse to wear that patch and stand up for that. That shows that not only that they have great courage, but it shows that courage is lacking in our society because pretty much everybody expects that every man is just going to go along with whatever society dictates. What else? What would you say about the state of courage in men? How so? Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And if you're being honest with yourself, and if I'm being honest with myself, I see that inconsistency not just in the spectrum of men, but in myself too. Now, there's some things where, some moments where I got the courage thing down. I stand up, I do something that I think requires bravery, and that's hard. But then 2 days later, I got to be courageous in another situation. I totally crumble. I see that inconsistency in myself. I don't know about you. What else? What would you say about the state of courage in men? Tell you what, you're right about that. Yeah. And that's one of those things that as a kid you don't realize is going to take courage when you grow up. You don't realize how much courage it takes to raise your kids the way they need to be raised. It takes courage to tell your kids no sometimes. It really does. It really does. Yes, sir. So that leadership and that courage, that's something the world should see in us, absolutely. And it hampers the church, right? When the men in that church do not have courage. One of you two. Well, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that's basically Goliath. If you think about us and Goliath, he's got that macho man mentality where his courage is rooted in his brashness and his ugliness and his own brawn and physical strength, right? And that's kind of a fate. We're getting too far ahead, but yes, you're exactly right about that. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's exactly right. Back home, I did a communion talk last Sunday, And I actually did the talk about the wrath of God and how that makes Jesus' sacrifice so great because we're saved from the wrath of God through him. And in that talk, I actually used the word hell from the pulpit. And I don't know about you. I don't know if you've ever used the word hell from the pulpit. But even in a church of 500 people that are very like-minded with me, it felt weird. And that just speaks to that political correctness. That as a preacher who's preaching the Bible, trying to be like Jesus, I feel weird even using the word hell anymore. Speaks to something. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's exactly right. I've, man, now I'm getting all the hands. Okay, okay, got a couple more. And it's interesting how all of that could have been avoided if Adam would have decided to display a little bit of courage right there in the beginning and not listen to the voice of his wife. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the source of that courage after we get one more person to say something. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When you start to look at it, it comes out in everything, right? It shows courage to really apologize when you know you've done something wrong, and it shows courage to not apologize, right? When you know that you're making the right decision and it's kind of upsetting some people. Absolutely. So I think it's pretty much agreed upon that we all know that courage is necessary. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, where does courage come from? And how does David become a man who has such bravery and such courage to fight a giant when everybody else in the armies of Israel doesn't have that same kind of courage? So I want you to start reading with me in 1 Samuel 17, verse 20. There are three things I want to point out, three things three ways David gained courage that I think we can learn from his example. It says, "So David arose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting the war cry." Stop there. That's interesting. I've never picked up on this before. But here are these men who are super, super, super scared, going out shouting a war cry. Doesn't that speak to the idea that sometimes our courage is much more voiced than it is an actual action? Have you ever noticed that in yourself? Courage means nothing when it's just words, because that's all they've got here. Sorry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. Then David left his baggage into the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered in order to greet his brothers. And as he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words, and David heard them. When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. The men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who's coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel. And it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" Now understand that David is not here because he's supposed to fight in this battle. David is not a military man, but he ends up getting involved because he's bringing some cheese and some grain to his brothers and their commanders. And yet, even still, David ends up ultimately getting into this fight. And the reason he gets into this fight is found right there in verse 26. Why does David ultimately get himself involved? Why? Yeah, okay. Right. That's my second point. I had one point before that, but that's probably the biggest one, so thanks for saying it. Mhm. That's right. That's right. What I want you to see that David shows us here about the source of courage is that courage comes not from having a little bit of fear, but it comes from feeling great responsibility. That's what's going on with David here. Notice that it says, I think in verse 24, oh, verse 20, in verse 23, that David heard the words of the Philistine. Notice all the things that the text could have said that it doesn't say. David saw him and thought, I got great tactics. I can figure out how to get around this guy, right? Oh, his shaft, his spear is kind of weak. I see a weakness in it, or he's not as tall as he really seems. It's not that David isn't afraid. David would have to be an idiot to not be afraid of Goliath. He's Goliath. David doesn't go fight because he's not scared. David goes and fights because he feels this tremendous responsibility. He has this beating inside of his heart that says, something must be done about this. This guy can't stand up here and reproach Israel. He can't stand up here and taunt the armies of the living God. You can't just sit back and let him do this. Something must be done about this. You're going to say something? Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot of fear that comes with responsibility, but there's also a lot of courage you have to exercise, right? Because something must be done about this. Was you going to say something? Mhm. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's what I want you to understand, that courage comes when you feel a great responsibility. That's the source of it, at least one of the sources of it. I think people have misconceptions about courageous people. I think we think one of two things about them. Either one, they do what they do because they aren't scared, or two, they do what they do because they just aren't as scared as me. And so one of the mistakes that we make as Christians sometimes is we look back and we tell ourselves, look, I would do that courageous thing that that other person is doing if I just figured out how to be less scared, because that's why they're doing it, right? They're doing this because they're less scared. This is what happens with children when something goes bump in the night and they go to their parents' room, right? They go to their parents' room and they say, oh, Dad will go look at it because Dad's not scared of the thing that's going bump in the middle of the night downstairs in our house. The truth is, when you become a dad, you realize, yeah, I'm scared of that thing, but why do you go down with the baseball bat and check it out? Because you have a responsibility. It's not that you're not scared. You're scared of intruders. You're scared of people with guns coming into your house. That does scare you, doesn't it? But you have a responsibility. You are the dad. You are the man. You are the protector. And so you exhibit courage because you feel responsibility. And that is what we need to understand about our courage, that it comes from feeling responsibility. Something must be done about this. You know, there are all kinds of ways that we have to exhibit courage as men. And it's not just fighting monsters or hitting intruders with baseball bats. You know, it takes a lot of courage to confront your brother when he's in sin, doesn't it? To come up to him and say, you know what, brother, I see what you're doing. You should not be doing that. That takes courage. And we don't do that because we're not scared. I am scared to do that. I do that because I feel responsibility. My brother, the one that I love, is getting himself into trouble. Something must be done about this. It takes courage to make an unpopular household decision. To lead your family and to make a decision that your wife and your kids are going to hate you for making. That takes courage. And I'm scared of that sometimes. But I do it because I feel a sense of responsibility. They may not like this, but something must be done about this. It takes courage to be vulnerable with our brothers and to confess our sins and our struggles with each other. You know, you guys probably have that one person here who's really good, that one guy who's really good at confessing their sins. Yes? We have one guy back in Tampa. His name is Rob. He's super awesome at confessing his sins. And I always think, oh, Rob just does that because he's not scared. No. Rob does that because he looks at his sins and he says, something must be done about this. And even though I don't like confessing to you that I've done this thing that's wrong, I know this is the only way it's really going to get fixed. And so he does the scary thing and he allows himself to be vulnerable because he knows that something must be done about this. That's where courage comes from, that sense of responsibility. That this giant can't taunt God. He can't taunt the armies of the living God. Something must be done about this. All right. Yes, sir. Mhm. That's right. And as a shepherd, there's a parallel there, right? Shepherds of a congregation, they ought to be willing to do that. I love your hands. I've got to go. I'm sorry. Because if we don't, we're not going to talk about faith, and that'd be a travesty. I want you to see this secondly, that courage comes not from self-confidence, but courage comes from faith in God. In verse 31, the Bible says, when the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail. Isn't that interesting? That's exactly what's happening. Their hearts are failing because they have no courage. On account of him, your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." And so when you look at these two men, when you look at Goliath and when you look at David, it's interesting to compare their courage. Would you say that Goliath is a courageous man? Would you say he's brave? Ah, yes, I love it. Yes and no, right? I would say yes. He is brave in a way. But what's the source of his courage? What is he brave because of? He's brave because he's big. He's brave because he's skilled. He's brave because he's got awesome weapons that are really big, and he's so much bigger than everybody else. And so understand that Goliath's bravery is rooted in his own physical abilities. Now, how's that different than David? Yeah, he's not brave because of what he can do. He's not like, man, I got this slingshot. I've been doing this for years. I got him. Although, yeah, he's got some skills. He's brave because of God. And so understand that his confidence is in the promise and in the deliverance of God. His confidence is not based on his own abilities. And if it were, there's no way David goes and fights that giant. His confidence is rooted in his faith. And that is the most potent and powerful kind of courage. Courage that is fueled by faith in the living God. Now, it may be that you may look at your life and you may be kind of a courageous person because of your abilities, right? You may think you're really smart. You may think you're really strong. You may think you're very wise, or you got all this stuff figured out, and you may be that. But if your confidence and your courage is not rooted in your faith, then the day is going to come when the challenge is going to be bigger than you. It's going to be bigger than your strength. It's going to be bigger than your smarts. It's going to be bigger than whatever you can control with your hands. And that day, if your courage is rooted in yourself, what's going to happen? You're going to crumble, right? Your heart is going to be shattered, just like the armies at the beginning of the story. The only way to make sure that you never crumble in fear is to put your faith in someone other than yourself. Put your faith in the put your confidence in the deliverance and the promise of God. Now, it is interesting that David goes on and he talks about how this faith came to be inside of him. It's not that God just took him one day and said, "Hey, you kind of believe in me. Let's see how you do with the giant." He gave him some opportunities to grow his faith and to stretch his faith before he got to the valley of Elah, didn't he? And so the question that I would ask you to ask yourself is, how is God trying to stretch your faith right now? What in your life, what opportunities, what challenges is he putting in your life that may give you a chance to increase your faith, to increase your courage in him? And are you taking advantage of those opportunities? You may not be ready to fight that giant, but if there's a bear or there's a lion that's coming after one of your sheep, are you willing to go after it? Are you willing to stretch your faith? And more to the point, maybe, as fathers of young children, boys and girls, are you letting your kids stretch their faith? Are you letting them have those opportunities where they have to do something scary instead of just doing what I want to do and taking care of everything for them so they don't have to be scared? Are you letting them stretch their faith? Because that's one of your jobs as a dad, I think. Any questions, comments about that? All right. I guess I did okay on that one. I want you to see this thirdly and finally. That courage comes not only from you, but it comes from the example of others. So I was going to read here verses 38 through 51. We were going to go through the battle and all that, but you guys know how that ends, and I've got 5 minutes. And so I'm going to go ahead and skip past that if that's okay. One thing that's very interesting, though, you know David, he goes to the brook, he gets the 5 stones, he slings one, he kills Goliath, he comes over to him, he cuts off his head. I want you to notice what happens to the rest of the people after David does this in verse 52. It says, "Then the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the slain Philistines lay along the way to Shaaraim, even to Gath and Ekron. What effect did David's courage have on the army? Yeah, it's infectious, right? I almost said something I shouldn't have said. um, it's infectious. It spreads. It's inspiring, right? That's what happened. His bravery inspires other people's bravery. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, that's kind of a lame point. I mean, Goliath was gone, so I guess it was easy to go fight against everybody else, right? But if you look further in the life of David, at the very end of his life in 2 Samuel chapter 23, you learn something very interesting. Go there with me. This will be the last passage we go to. And this helps us emphasize the idea that David's courage, his bravery, it rubs off on people and it inspires people. So in 2 Samuel chapter 23, we have this wonderful ending to the life of David. And in this chapter, we read all about his mighty men. And listen to what it says beginning in verse 8. We'll just read a section of this. These are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb, Bashabeth, a Tegmononite, chief of the captains. He also called Adino the Eznite because of 800 slain by him at one time. And after him, Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of 3 mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there to battle, and the men of Israel had withdrawn. He arose and struck the Philistines until his hand was weary and clung to the sword. And the Lord brought about a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to strip the slain. Now after him was Shema, the son of Agi, a Hararite. And the Philistines were gathered into a troop where there was a plot of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. But he took his stand in the midst of the plot, defended it, and struck the Philistines, and the Lord brought about a great delivery. And on and on and on it goes in 2 Samuel 23, talking about the works of David's mighty men. And I want you to think about that contrast. That this day in Israel, in 1 Samuel 17, you can't find one guy in the whole army who will fight a giant. But by the time David's reign is ending, he has a whole cohort of mighty men who are willing to do amazing things, who are willing to fight giants. In fact, his mighty men go out, and they do kill the descendants of the giant. And so understand that courage rubs off on people. And that when you become the kind of person who with faith in God, with that great sense of responsibility, is willing to say, I'm going to do something, I'm going to make my stand, that's when other men are inspired to do the same. All right. I'm done talking. So y'all make your comments. It goes long. It's your fault. That's exactly right. That's what we see when we look at Stephen, right? Stephen didn't make it out of there alive. He was stoned to death. But we are still inspired by his courage. We still want to be like him. Is there another comment? Yes, sir. especially when it comes to having the courage to speak to the lost, right? That's where that regret really comes in. All right, now I'm really running up against it. I'm going to let you talk, and then I'm going to shut it down. And so, gentlemen, I'll just close by reminding you what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16. Act like men. Be strong. Thank you.